everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for episode 12 of season 3 of Revise and Resubmit. I'm Dr. Kim Bissell, the Southern Progress Endowed Professor in Magazine Journalism and the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Communication and Information Sciences at the University of Alabama.
And I'm Dr. Annalisa Volin, an Assistant Professor in the Department of Communication Studies, also at the University of Alabama, and we work in the Institute for Communication and Information Research, or the ICIR, at UA. So, Kim, I feel like one of those popular interview questions is, if you were going to sit down and have breakfast with a famous person in history or from history, who would that be and why? And thankfully, I have never been in an interview because I have absolutely no idea of how I would answer it. So I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you that question.
Thank you.
I think it's a good one. And that brings us to one of our main topics of conversation with today's guest, Dr. Dianne Bragg, and that's history. And I don't anyway, often think about communication history or how communication relates to history. But spoiler, it does.
Well, I have to admit, I learned so much from today's guest, and I feel like I should have learned way more about this topic at some point along the line, especially when I was in college. Despite being a journalism major, I never had to take journalism history or media history. My loss for sure, especially after talking with today's guest.
Well, as someone who has gone back and gotten another degree after my Ph.D., I'm just going to put it out there. It's not too late to go back and take that journalism history class. I'm not really suggesting that. But right. I took classical rhetoric, and actually I took mass comm law, which is really history oriented. And that's something else that Dr. Bragg talks about with us today.
And as we reflected on our conversation with today's guest, it brought to mind how so many historical issues, like the role of the Black press during the Civil War, are playing out now, just in different contexts.
Yeah, and in our conversation, we also learn about how to do historical research and how findings from research in this area really help us better understand what's going on with media right now. So you have to listen to this conversation. I promise we're all learning so much.
For sure. So let's give a very warm welcome to Dr. Dianne Bragg, an associate professor in the Department of Journalism and Creative Media, right here at the University of Alabama. Welcome, Dianne. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dianne. We are thrilled to be able to catch up with you.
Well, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So, Dianne, I was thinking about a time when you were a featured speaker for a co-sponsored event between AJMC and C-SPAN. And I remember just vividly being there because it seems like, wow, it may have been 10 years ago, it may have been 3 years ago. But you gave a talk that was titled Reporting in a Hostile Political Environment. And I remember attending that event thinking, this is so, so cool because you're representing our department and the college and the university so well. But what was it like for you? That whole speaking event was packed with people, and also C-SPAN was there.
It was really interesting. I was very excited about that panel. I had some really good people lined up for that. And scheduling wise, we ended up, like one of the last sessions on the last day. And I was a little disappointed by that because you never really know what you're going to get. Now, that particular year, the conference was in Washington, D.C., which was great. And we did not find out. I got an email, I believe it was, like the night before that C-SPAN wanted to film our panel. And so, I was immediately like, oh my gosh, well, that's great, but oh wow, I hope we have some people show up and I hope, it goes well. And I reached out to all of my panelists just to let them know, so that everyone would not be surprised by cameras. And because,
Right.
at the conference, that's not normal at the conferences. And so it went really well, I thought. And we did have we immediately, of course, started spreading the word, C-SPAN's going to be there. And I think actually even AJMC might have tweeted something out. So we did end up with a nice crowd, which I was very grateful for. And I felt the panel was really good, and I felt like the topic was very important. And we really got into some things about women journalists and what they were facing at the time from people, especially through social media and dangerous things. And we had Mike Dorning was there, and he is an editor, and I'm trying to think if he's still with Bloomberg right now. I think he is. And he was really, it was great, him talking about how he tried to support his female reporters and saying they face things that male reporters absolutely do not face on social media and emails and things like that. So I thought it was a great moment, and I think it turned out really well.
It did for sure.
I feel like that's going to lead us into some additional questions, but
as always,
to get to know you a little bit better, and we'll do a little rapid fire section of our podcast to learn who you are. So,
okay.
Dianne, can you tell us and our listeners where you are from?
Oh, well, yes, I tell everybody where I'm from. I'm from Memphis. I have it on bumper stickers on my car. So, yes, I am a University of Memphis Tiger, although Roll Tide at the same time, right? But I was born and raised in Memphis. I actually raised my children there. I have 2 degrees from the University of Memphis. I owe a great debt to that school as a woman who went back to school with children. And that's a whole very important part of my life, doing that. And so I like to point out to other people that no one else knows what barbecue really is, no matter what they say. They're wrong. So that's a little bit about me right there.
How long have you been at the University of Alabama?
I moved to Tuscaloosa in 2006, and I came here because my husband had taken a job here. And so we moved here at the time. And I had been working at the University of Memphis and had considered working on a Ph.D., but I already had 2 degrees from there. And I had looked into University of Mississippi because it wasn't that far from my house, but nothing really panned out. And when I knew I was coming here, I thought, well, this door's opened. And I came and I met with Jennings Bryant and a number of other people and decided to apply. And so moved here in 2006 and started working on my doctorate, and been here ever since. Yes.
And then tell our listeners what you teach.
Well, I teach several things, but my 2 primary courses for undergraduate, like juniors and seniors, is the Mass Comm Law class, Media Law. And that's a wonderful class, very strongly focused on First Amendment. And I throw in a lot of history there because history is my area. And the other class that I teach regularly is the graduate seminar on journalism history. And I do that for on-campus students. And we also have our online masters now, the distance learners. And I help design that course. And so I teach that also.
Nice.
Occasionally I get a JCM 180, which is an introduction to journalism for freshmen, which is totally the opposite end of what my other 2 classes are. But it's fun. And I have found with that class, I often develop some relationships that I end up following those kids all the way through their graduation and maybe on to graduate school. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So what did the young Dianne think she would be doing when she grew up?
So young Dianne, first of all, said she would never get married and have children, which is why I have 3 sons, right? So yeah, your younger self doesn't always really know what she's talking about. But I really did not know what I wanted to do, except, and this is interesting, this has been pointed out to me from friends, I loved school. I always loved school. Like getting my book bag and lunchbox every fall was the highlight of my year. And so in the summer, I would miss school. And so I would round up the neighborhood children into one of the rooms in my house, and we would play school. And I was always the teacher. I was always the teacher. And how I got them to do that, I have no earthly idea. But so maybe that was a little bit prescient thinking about, what I might end up doing. But here I am. Yeah.
So did you make them bring a lunchbox?
Yeah.
We didn't, but we did have Kool-Aid snacks. We did that because we always had Kool-Aid. Yes. And red Kool-Aid, which we now know no one should ever drink, but I drank it by the gallon. So yeah, whatever.
Do you have a pack now?
Do I have, well,
Or a
yes, actually a book bag. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yes. So I do actually. I have several. My favorite one that I carry a lot right now is one that I picked up actually in, it's a Kath Kidston bag from, I got it in Dublin, Ireland when my son was doing a study abroad, and it's got little birds all over it. And my claim to fame is that some of the royal family use them, similar things for their diaper bags, but whatever. Yeah.
Oh, fancy.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I'll show it to you next time I see you.
Yeah.
Please do.
I also have some more sophisticated, like black leather ones, but whatever.
So, want to shift a little bit and get into the scholarship that you do. Can you give us an elevator pitch of your research and scholarly work?
Yes. So it's really interesting. I kind of fell into this when I came to Alabama. I'd always loved history, and there was a history of journalism course that David Sloan taught. And so I signed up for that. I will tell you this little story. When I was looking at the course list and looking at that class, someone else who was at the school was looking at it with me, someone who worked there. And they kind of leaned over to me and said, I don't know if you want to take that or not. It's really hard. And so I didn't really know how to respond to that. Like, were they saying I wasn't smart enough, or I don't really know, but I went ahead, I plunged right in, and it ended up really setting me on the path of what I do right now. My cognate was in history, and so my focus has ended up, I've done some work on the Black press, but primarily really the antebellum press leading up to the Civil War. So 1820, 1840 on up to 1861. And that would be where the majority of my research has been done. But I've also done some on some women journalists from the late 19th century, Nellie Bly and some people like that. But I would say basically 19th century is where I am.
So tell us, if you had to come up with a headline for one of your more interesting findings, what might that be?
Well, you wouldn't think this would be it, but sometimes today you need to say it. Slavery caused the Civil War.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You've got to follow up.
Yes. So that shouldn't be something surprising or sensational, but apparently it is. So yeah.
Okay. So has this headline, tell us about the findings from where this headline has come from.
Well, I did research on antebellum newspapers across the North and the South, looking for topics of dissension between the two areas. And that was really what ended up being my dissertation. And I've ended up delving into different parts of that a lot deeper. The Wilmot Proviso, which we won't go a whole lot into, but just some seminal moments where, you knew that things were headed in a certain direction. And at one point, there was a gag order in Congress. They couldn't even bring up the word slavery, could not be talked about. And then this Wilmot Proviso happened, which kind of brought it to the forefront. And one of the things that I did, I was reading about it in newspapers, and they really picked up on that. And it continued on through into the war, where if you were someone who supported the Wilmot Proviso, the South, really looked down on you. And I went back to the congressional record, which is so great now. We have access today to so many records online, but went into that and found that the year before that, slavery had not been mentioned at all on the floor of Congress. And the next year it was like 70 something times. And that just the floodgates opened. And so it was just interesting to see. There were other areas that came up in these news stories, but all of them had some sort of tie to slavery, no matter what it was. And so those were kind of my findings.
That's yeah, I think that's really interesting. So tell us and tell our listeners, like, what does research, the historical research, look like? What are you doing when you're doing, like, I'm putting quotes in around doing, but what is research
Yeah.
like?
Reading is so much of it. I mean, that's, and, there are different content analysis is a type of historical research where people look for, keywords and how often those appear and that kind of thing. And that's very important. But with really in-depth journalism, qualitative research, you really have to read the stories. You also have to, look at the placement of an article. Where is it? Is it on a front page? Is it buried inside? How prominent is the headline in the deck? All that kind of things. And so it's not something where you can just look up keywords and say, how often does this appear? And so I would say that the number one thing is reading and taking things in context, always paying attention to the context of the paper you are looking at, it is in, and what is happening at the time.
So I'm gonna ask another question here. So I think a lot of times when we think about research in a kind of experimental way, we always talk about being an expert in the literature. And
Right.
what I hear here is, like, you've got to be not only an expert in, like, what you're looking for, like, methodologically and how you're doing it, but my goodness, you have to know, like, all of the history around what you're looking for. And
Yes.
that's a lot. That's
a lot of reading. That's what I'm
It is
taking
a lot
away.
of reading. It is. And, I was very, very fortunate when I was doing my doctoral studies. I took 3 classes over in the history department at University of Alabama, which is a wonderful department. And I was fortunate, Dr. George Rabel, who is a premier Civil War historian, was there. And so I took a Southern literature class with him, and we literally read in this one semester 15 books.
wow.
Not parts of books, and not, some of them were small, some of them were large, but it was 15 books. And we would have to do comparison writings on those and have discussion. And there was no way in that seminar to come in and not have read thoroughly the readings that were assigned. And of course, Dr. Rabel knew them, backwards and forwards. That really sort of honed my reading discipline when it came to research. And after that, I took a class with Dr. Rothman, who I believe is now chair of that department. And I did a paper for his class that zeroed in on Tennessee newspapers in the year leading up to the war and then up until Tennessee pretty much fell to the Union. And reading all types of newspapers. I had to, actually at the time, because they weren't all online, I had to go to Tennessee, go to Nashville, and go to Memphis to look at papers there, and order microfilm, all those kinds of things that now so much of it is online. But it was a really great experience on just immersing myself in this small sort of section or period of the time. And I don't know, that's I took a lot away from those classes. It really helped me tremendously in honing my skills there.
Okay, so I mean, everything that you're saying sounds absolutely fascinating, but what I'm kind of taking away is there's a great opportunity for there to be tremendous application of the work that you do. And it can come in the form of what you do in the classroom, but I feel like what you're doing is something everybody needs to know and hear about. Can you talk about the application of your work and whether it's specific to our discipline or other disciplines, or if you're thinking about the public. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. Oh my goodness. I mean, I think part of the problem we are having today with media literacy and understanding science, things that maybe people are not well versed in. But the problem is, you don't have to go into something being well versed. You just have to be willing to look at the experts in that area and read and learn about things. And there seems to be a resistance to doing that, to instead just listening to sound bites and things like that, instead of doing your own research, which is so much easier to do today than it
Right.
was. I mean, I tell my students all the time, like in media law, in the journalism history class, it's like, if you want to go, read about a case that the Supreme Court, made a decision on in 1960, there are like a number of sites. You don't even have to just Google it. Go to particular sites that give you the transcript, tell you the decisions. When we used to have to go to the library, and you used to have to find, in that Supreme Court casebook, and read those things. And after you found them, it's just so much easier to do that today. And one of the things I try to do in the media law class, because those are undergraduates, even though they're juniors and seniors, is I do bring in a lot of history. We spend probably the first quarter to a third of the class looking at the history of how we came to what we believe today about free speech.
I
And
love that.
yeah, all the cases and there are so many things they have never heard of and aren't aware of. And the idea that the Bill of Rights originally, as a country, we didn't really think the Bill of Rights applied to all the states. And the fact that we now think that, we have this doctrine that says that a state can't take away a right that you have, at the federal level as a United States citizen, that wasn't something people originally thought. And so I think that the skills that I've learned, and hopefully the things that I bring out in the classroom and just in my life in general, are about being willing to learn, being willing to read, being willing to look at context. And I think we would all do a whole lot better if we could do that more.
Agreed.
Yes, definitely.
And I'm thinking about, okay, so I'm going to ask you to put on like a hat that goes into the future. But when you're talking about history, I mean, I'm thinking about right now and what people 20 years from now are going to be reading about right now. And how do you know, or what do you think is going to happen with respect to like credibility? Like so you talked about media literacy and being willing to listen to experts. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's a lot of non-experts out there that have a platform.
There are.
Add up and how, what do you think?
I mean, I think the future is kind of what we see even now. So when we think about the Spanish flu, just recently before we had COVID come out, there were some historical works that came out about that period in time and about how people resisted, masking. And really at that point in time, doctors and nurses weren't really even washing their hands the way they should have. We've learned so much over the past 100 years. And so I think that, I don't know that it'll be 20 years, but maybe 50 years, people will look back and say, what were they thinking? Or, but then I think something else in the future will come up that will create some of the same problems. I think we often have people in society who are disgruntled or unhappy or argumentative or whatever, sometimes for legitimate reasons. And because of that, they take certain stands without really contemplating the consequences of those stands. And then they get dug in. And there's really not much historically you can see. There's really not much you can do about that. I am right now, I'm going to admit this publicly. I can't believe I'm doing this. But so for a conference in a few weeks, I have been reading Gone with the Wind for the first time in my life. Now, I've seen the movie. I've seen it a lot of times, and I know all the things that are wrong with that movie. I still love that movie, but I know all the things that are wrong with it, and I acknowledge that. And I really didn't know going into the book, because it won the Pulitzer Prize. And definitely there are things in the book that are uncomfortable and are really just so, inappropriate, but it's historically, I think, meant very accurate. And the descriptions of the people and the way they felt and the way they dug in. And so I think, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they'll be digging in about something else, no matter what the facts tell them.
And what I hear is like history is really important, and maybe we need to be learning more about it.
Learning more about history and learning how to do history. Like in high school, students shouldn't just be reading their history book. I literally had a senior level American history teacher who sat on a stool after lunch every day and read the book to us. That was my history class.
Man.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would love to see more students actually doing history, and so sort of applying that. And I think that would be very helpful, but we just don't have that going on in most, to be honest with you, not only in most high schools, in many universities and colleges either.
So true.
Yes.
So Dianne, we're going to shift gears on you just a little bit. I
Okay.
know when you were in your doctoral program, you had an opportunity to overlap with Dr. Jennings Bryant.
I did.
And I was wondering if you had a great Jennings story, or if you can tell us about a class that you might have taken from him or an interaction you had. We would love to hear a Jennings story from you.
Yeah. So he, sort of shepherded me into the program, and I ended up taking an entertainment theory class with him. And it was a wonderful class. And what was great about Jennings was that he really wanted you to follow your own interest, whatever that might be. And he would, we had to choose a topic to research. And he knew that I loved to read. I loved books. And so I ended up doing, he got me into doing a paper on female mystery writers, which
Wow.
I know. And so it ended up just being this great paper. I got it accepted at a conference and presented it, but it came out, well, it kind of started with Edna Buchanan, who had been a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter for the Miami Herald and went on to write books that were sort of crime, mystery kind of things. And I loved her work. And so he sort of expanded it and said, well, you should read this, and why don't you write about them? And I ended up actually able, through a friend, to interview Edna Buchanan over the phone, which was just so amazing to be able to talk to her. And so I loved that about him. He had just a witty sense of humor. I mean, he was fun to be in the classroom with. He treated everyone with respect and listened to some really stupid ideas from all of us with grace. And, I just, I hated when he retired, but at the same time, I was happy for him when he was able to retire, because I think he got to go enjoy his tractor. And I know that was a really important thing for him.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
So Dianne, I want to kind of ask you to think about your area of research and how you bring that in the classroom, and kind of all together. What do you think, or what are you looking forward to, or something that excites you about the future of your discipline?
Oh, wow. I really, I'm hopeful about history and the humanities in general. Right now, there's been kind of a downturn in that in university education. But I think what has happened over the last year or so has sort of made people realize that it's important for people to study history and to understand how to do this type of research. So I'm hopeful about that. and that we will see more interest in it. I'm really grateful. University of Alabama is one of the few programs at the master's level that does require a history class. Not all of them do that. And it's really important because we have students come in for a master's in journalism who have not taken a media history or journalism history class at the undergraduate level. And so a lot of this is new to them. And so I'm very hopeful about the future when it comes to historical study. We tend to be cyclical in some ways, but I'm hoping it'll come back and there will be more money put into that type of research. I understand completely the importance of the science and math and engineering. I don't disagree with that at all. Those are very important areas, but not to the detriment of the humanities. And so I think there's a place for both of them, and I think they make people well-rounded and maybe understand each other a little bit more. And so I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's my hope for the future.
I like it.
I like it too. And I like hope. I like optimism. We're at a time where we need that.
We are, definitely.
So, Dianne, I feel like we could ask you 39 additional questions, but we are at the point of this episode where we are going to do the rapid fire finish with one, hopefully, very fun question.
Okay.
We have had a bit of a hiatus of in-person conferences.
Yes.
So keeping that strain of hope and optimism, what academic conference are you looking forward to attending in future when we return to them?
Oh my goodness. So I was supposed to have one in 2 weeks in Chattanooga that I love so much, and it's going to have to be virtual again. So I'm disappointed about that. But the next one on my radar is that ICA in Paris. So yeah, I know I am not alone in that.
You are
okay,
not
there's a
alone.
lot of us. We can
concur you are not alone.
Yes.
I think we're going to be having a reunion of all the podcast guests because everyone has said ICA. So
we should all get together, hopefully in Paris, right? Yeah.
That's sure. Dianne, I just want to thank you for spending some time with us today, telling us a little bit more about your experiences while you were here as a graduate student, and then what you're doing now. It's been so great to catch up with you.
Well, I've enjoyed being here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.